Hey there! If you love exploring Christian philosophy and theology, you're in the right place. The video's about to get started, but first, I want to ask you a question. Do you find the content I produce on this channel valuable? If so, here are some ways you can help promote it. The first is completely free. Give this video a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Second, consider doing a one-time donation, kind of like a tip. You can do this in the form of a super chat or super thanks below. Third, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get early access to videos, they get to be a part of a patron-only Facebook group we call TAC Academy, and patrons can participate in the book club that meets on Zoom once a month. The link to become a patron is in the description. Thanks to all my current patrons for your support. Enjoy the interview. Welcome to The Analytic Christian. I'm Jordan, and this is the channel that helps you explore Christian philosophy and theology. Today I'm joined by Dr. Christian Miller to answer one of my patrons' questions that they submitted through Patreon. So let me go ahead and read this question out. I'll put it on the screen. Let's say morality is objective on both atheism and theism. On which view is altruism more valuable? It seems to me that the atheist can look eventual non-existence right in the face, and that choosing to be virtuous, knowing that he or she will lose everything in return, feels completely irrational yet deeply noble. The theist or Christian, meanwhile, may give up absolutely everything in this life, but they are still promised absolutely everything. Would that undermine the sacrifice the theist makes? Having faith that they will gain everything, perhaps even making altruism impossible given Christianity. It seems like the theist really doesn't lose anything, while the atheist really does lose everything in an attempt to be virtuous. Therefore, a virtuous atheist seems exceedingly more virtuous than even the most virtuous Christian. What do you make of this?
It's great to be back with you. Thanks for having me on again. I never know what's going to happen after I'm on a show for the first time if people ever want to see me again. So it's quite an honor to be back a second time. And really, first of all, complimentary towards this questioner. This is a great series of thoughts. I mean, really impressive philosophy going on here, and very rich comments. So I'll have one thought to say in a response. I have a series of thoughts. And so maybe what I'll do is just make an initial point so we can pause and go further if we want to, and then I'll go on to a second point and then a third point. So
That sounds
let
good.
me pick up on to be to begin. Let me pick up on the comments about perhaps even making making altruism impossible given Christianity. That I think is the point I would probably be least persuaded by. Uh, what we'll do, I think, as we go along is to see, I'll be more persuaded, more persuaded. And ultimately, what I want to say to this questioner is the key point that this questioner is making, I find very plausible. So I'm actually going to agree with this questioner on the key point at the end of the day. But this one here, so let's step back and think about different kinds of motivation. So, broadly speaking, we can think that there are three categories of motivation behind any moral action. So let's make the action visiting your friend in the hospital. Uh, and then we ask, well, why did you visit your friend in the hospital? And I want to say there are three broad categories. One is altruistic reasons, one is egoistic reasons, and one is dutiful reasons or motives. So egoistic motives are ones where it's aimed at benefiting myself. I did it because I thought I would get some kind of benefit out of it for myself. Perhaps I thought that by visiting my friend in the hospital, my friend would come to visit me in the future if I'm in the hospital, or perhaps because I was bored and this was be entertaining, or perhaps I didn't want to feel guilty if I didn't visit my friend, or perhaps because I wanted to get rewards in the afterlife. Those are all different kinds of egoistic reasons or motives because the ultimate goal is to benefit myself. That's one category. Another category is dutiful motivation. That has to do with the right, the good, because it's required. So why did I visit my friend? Because it was the right thing to do, or I had a duty to, or because God commanded me to, or because the moral law said that that's the right thing to do. These are impartial motives or reasons, and have less to do with me benefiting or the other person benefiting, but doing something because again, impartially, it's the right thing to do. The third category is altruism. And now we'll get to the point of my first comment. Um, Altruistic motivation has to do with benefiting another person for his or her own sake. And that motivation is compatible with benefiting yourself as well. But that can't be the goal of altruistic motivation. You can benefit yourself as well as a byproduct or side effect of the motivation. But if you're really altruistically motivated, your focus is on what's good for the other person. Now, in the Christian or broadly theistic context, you can find all three kinds of motivation. I don't see any reason to think that being a committed theist excludes any one kind. And in particular, it doesn't exclude altruistic motivation. Now, granted, of course, if you do a moral action because you want to get rewards in the afterlife, say you want to get to heaven and enjoy heavenly benefits for yourself, or negatively, if you want to avoid punishment, uh, then that's egoistic. And I don't think that that's going to be a praiseworthy kind of motivation. Well, we'll talk more about praiseworthiness and blameworthiness a little bit down the road. Um, but that's not the only kind of motivation a theist can have. A theist can be dutifully motivated too. They can do a moral action because they think it's the right thing to do, or because it's part of the Ten Commandments, or because God commanded them. And I think it's pretty clear that a theist can do a moral action for altruistic reasons. Uh, they can do it because they care about someone else, or they love someone else, or they want to benefit someone else. And I don't see why a belief in theism, or more specifically, a belief in an afterlife to which a theist goes, has to corrupt that motivation to the point where it can no longer be altruistic. Now, I do grant that it can be the case that as a side effect or byproduct, the theist will benefit. Maybe as a side effect or byproduct, they'll get rewarded in the afterlife. Um, and I also grant that believing that there's an afterlife can be comforting. And when the morally right thing to do is risky or dangerous, can be a source of comfort and assurance. I also grant that that seems right. But none of that necessitates that the altruistic motivation is corrupted or doesn't exist in the first place. So that's my first point. I think all the points that the questioner raises are reasonable points, but they don't entail the denial of altruistic motivation.
Okay. Yeah, so you've got egoism, some form of duties, and then altruism. These are three ways that someone might be motivated. When you ask, like, what's motivating you to do this a certain action? Well, I've things that benefit me, or I'm just doing it because it's my duty, or I'm doing it because it benefits somebody else. And it
Correct.
seems like there's nothing about theism that would make it the case that you can't do something for someone else's benefit. Maybe there's also benefits for you, but that doesn't take away from you're doing it out of. I guess it seems like your intentions really matter here. So if you're intending to benefit someone else, that's the motive. It doesn't seem like there's anything theism does that would somehow undermine that.
Well, I mean, we could ask. So there's possibility questions and there's frequency questions here. Uh, is it possible to believe in theism and also be altruistically motivated? I think the answer is clearly yes. Um, Now, not just possible, but actual. It happens. I hope in my case it happens fairly regularly. Um, there's still a frequency question, so which is, uh, does believing in theism make you more likely to be altruistically motivated than you would if you were an atheist? So if we grant that yes, it's compatible, theism and altruistic motivation are compatible. There's still a further question of, does theism make it harder or less likely that someone be altruistically motivated than not? And here, I mean, now this gets into just empirical matters. So it's hard to settle from the armchair. Ideally, you would want to do some kind of empirical assessment of a group of theists and a group of atheists, and determine, when they encounter similar kinds of morally charged situations, to what extent are they altruistically motivated or not? Are the atheists tend to be more altruistically motivated or not? And that's an empirical question. I have no data to support one way or the other. You might think from a Christian perspective, or just a theistic perspective in general. I mean, if you take seriously the command to love your neighbor as yourself, and you think that that involves altruistic caring and concern for others, then it had better be the case that Christians or anyone who follows that command, Jews and Muslims as well, it better be the case that they are pretty darn altruistically motivated a fair amount of the time. And that's I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on then to your second point that you wanted to make.
Right. So I don't think that was the heart of the questioner's paragraph here, or a series of arguments. So let's look at some other things that are said here. On what view is altruism more valuable? And here, um, the questioner then goes on and says, "It seems to me that the atheist can look eventual non existence right in the face." So it seems to me that what they're focusing on is not altruistic actions in general, or, you know, picking up some drop papers, or holding the door, or helping the old person across the street. Whether you do that selflessly or selfishly, for example, they have in mind a certain category of very special actions, life threatening actions, or actions in which it's likely that you will die in the process. Um, and so, in those special cases, is if you let's take a couple of cases, jumping on a grenade to save your fellow soldiers in the foxhole, um, being willing to be martyred or killed for a cause that you believe in. So one's a more immediate action where you might not have much time to think about it. You kind of instinctively just jump on the grenade. The other is a kind of action where you can deliberate whether I want to do this or not, and there's time and planning that goes into it, and you eventually commit yourself to dying for this cause. That's reading between the lines, or maybe just explicitly, it was what seems to be going on here. The atheist can look eventual non-existence right in the face. So there's the point about death. And that choosing to be virtuous, knowing that he or she will lose everything in return, feels completely irrational yet deeply noble. Uh, so, on which of these worldviews is that kind of action, altruistically done, more valuable? Um, Now, more valuable, that's an interesting word here. That can mean different things. So, it might mean instrumentally valuable, as a means to something else that's a good to achieve. If that's right, then, well, from a theistic perspective, jumping on a grenade or being a martyr could be more instrumentally valuable if you get rewarded for it. So it might be that in that case, the altruism is instrumentally good for the sake of benefiting in the afterlife. But I don't think that's what the questioner has in mind. Um, I I think what the questioner has in mind is either something like more valuable in and of itself intrinsically, or perhaps maybe what they have in mind is more praiseworthy or commendable. Uh, let's assume it's the last one. Uh, More praiseworthy or commendable. I think that's a charitable interpretation of what's going on here. Well, here we're in the realm of actions which are what standardly called in philosophy supererogatory. Supererogatory actions are ones that are above and beyond the call of duty. Uh, they are they're not required. They're not obligatory. They're above and beyond the call of duty. They're highly praiseworthy, but morally optional. And examples would be things like jumping on a grenade, running into a burning building, donating thousands of dollars to charity. Uh, is there a difference in the praiseworthiness of an action like that from when it's done from a theistic perspective or from an atheistic perspective. That I take is the main question or main driving concern of this comment. Uh, and here I'm I'm somewhat tempted by the thought of the questioner. Uh, I feel the pull of this idea that uh, if I altruistically sacrifice myself, my life, even though I'm doing it altruistically, in the background, I have the comforting thought that there's an afterlife where I'm going to go. That is not as praiseworthy, although very praiseworthy, as sacrificing myself, my life, altruistically, and having in the background the thought there is no afterlife. There is nothing to go on to. This will be the end of my life. I will experience nothing more forever. And yet, I'm still willing to do this because I believe in this cause or love these other people or care about my fellow soldiers. Um, if that's what the questioner is asking, then I'm going to be quite sympathetic to that thought. I feel the pull of that as well myself. Is that did that come across clearly? And
Yes. Yeah. Um, I know you had one more point to make, and then I wanted to add something at the end that relates to another interview that I did. That this came up in the second half of that interview. It was kind of the focus of the second half of that interview. So why don't you finish your third thought,
okay,
and
uh,
then we'll discuss that.
so I did kind of go out of order. I guess I just jumped right to where I agreed the most with the questioner. So I couldn't help myself because I thought that was the key takeaway, and it's really worth emphasizing. Um, Now, the last point, as we go a little further, um, the theists, meanwhile, may give up absolutely everything in this life, but they are still promised absolutely everything. Would that undermine the sacrifice the theist makes, having faith that they will gain everything? It seems like the theist really doesn't lose anything, while the atheist really does lose everything in an attempt to be virtuous. Now, here I think I'm kind of mixed bag, as my opinion here. Um, I don't think the theist doesn't really lose anything. Uh, Look, uh, theists care deeply about their families, their friends, their their lives that they live here, their projects, their pursuits, um, things in the here and now. And losing those things is not a trivial loss. Um, if I, tomorrow am in a situation where I have to, you know, perhaps jump in front of a car to save my children, um, and I somehow have some time to contemplate or not ahead of time, it's not a trivial thought to say, yes, there might be an afterlife that I'm going to go to, but I'm going to leave the life I have here. I'm not going to lose out on the continued relationships and experiences that I have here. Plus, those people who stay behind will suffer as a result. I hope. Maybe there'll be celebration. I'm gone, but it's not a reasonable thought that other people will be left behind and suffer too. So I do think, in the case of the theist who is giving up everything, in the sense of giving up their lives, uh, they do lose something, and that shouldn't be marginalized or downplayed. Uh, Now, of course, the atheist gives up something too. They give up the same things. They give up their family, friends, projects, and pursuits, and so forth, and all this. And there will be people who mourn them and are sad when they're gone, and the world is worse off afterwards. So that kind of cuts both ways. I think there's not much of a difference on that point. Um, Now, just to round this thought out, uh, the theists may give up absolutely everything in this life, but they are still promised everything. And so, That's, I think, the right way to put it. They may give up absolutely everything in this life. Yes, and it's costly. But there is a comforting belief that they have in the back of their minds that there is more to come, that there's another world beyond this, which is even greater than this world. And so long as that doesn't corrupt the motivation state remains altruistic, but it is a source of comfort that the atheist doesn't have. So I think I'm mostly sympathetic to what's being said in this part of the comments. However, I do want to emphasize that theists still have to give up something.
Yeah. Okay. That was clear. I don't feel like I really need to add much there. So it sounds like you made your 3 points, and a lot of what the questioner says, especially maybe the heart of what the questioner says, you say, yeah, I think that sounds right.
That's right. I didn't touch on one thing, and this is one I don't have a settled opinion about. So I could have just like dodged it or pretended like I did, notice it and just, um, said that's enough for now. But I do want to be intellectually honest about it, and that's the point about virtue. Um, so the the questioner ends by saying, "A virtuous atheist seems exceedingly more virtuous than even the most virtuous Christian." Now, that in a way is something that a Christian couldn't accept, since the most virtuous person of all is supposed to be Jesus. Uh, and by implication of this argument, there would be people who are even more virtuous than Jesus, because those people would be atheists who didn't have beliefs about the afterlife in their mind. Um, so there's a sense in which that needs to be addressed and thought through more. Um, Now, is it the case that uh, any if you have two people who perform the very same actions, morally speaking, uh, and one's an atheist and one's a Christian, and they do the same actions for altruistic reasons, uh, because the person is an atheist in the one case and a theist in the other case, therefore, by the reasoning we've already discussed, the atheist is more virtuous as a result. Um, That's an interesting argument I've never really given much thought to. So that's where I'm just going to be put my cards on the table. And I don't really have a lot to say about it yet. I really want to think about it some more. Um, there's complexity here and complication because in a traditional Christian framework, virtue isn't something that is acquired merely through our own human devices. So it would take some more unpacking and maybe another episode or something like that to go down this route in great detail. But as a quick comment, let me note that it's not the case, as I understand the history of Christianity and thinking about this matter, um, that you would have a Christian becoming virtuous of their own power and devices, and an atheist becoming virtuous of their own power and devices, and that we compare them side by side. There's always been a school of thought, maybe the school of thought, um, that says that the development of virtue and the cultivation of good character is in part the work of the Holy Spirit. Um, so this is a doctrine specific to Christianity. It's not a theistic view anymore, broadly generically theistic view anymore. So so the third person of the Trinity is somehow involved, and we have to say in what sense, um, side by side, cooperatively, causally, inspirationally, whatever the case might be, depending on your view, in the cultivation of these virtuous character traits. And that adds a wrinkle to the discussion that would, you know, take us a while to really unpack some more.
Hmm. Let me add a quick thought on that one, and then bring it back to this other discussion that I had. So
Mhm.
you mentioned like praiseworthiness a moment ago. I don't know that. merely whether the outcome is there's an afterlife with like rewards and benefits, or there isn't any afterlife. I don't know that that's solely what can determine who has more virtue, or which form of virtue is more valuable in these two cases, because you might want to compare uh, the starting points. So like if somebody started out,
Mm.
it was really really hard for them to become virtuous, and the other one it wasn't so hard for them to become virtuous, right? That's going to add a wrinkle. But the questioner might say, no, I'm thinking of somebody that they're we keep everything else equal. So they had the same starting
Right.
points, however, and then the only difference is whether there's an afterlife reward or not. Um, and yeah, that I do need to think more about that, and that I guess connects with this final question. I don't know if it's a question, just final thought, and then I'll get your thoughts on it. We'll wrap up. Okay, so here's how I see this becoming. People might be like, well, why does any of this really matter? Okay, I think it's interesting in itself, but there is a relevance to this within the philosophy of religion, and it has to do with the argument from divine hiddenness. And here's how. So I
Mm.
interviewed Andrew Cullison. I think now he's at the University of Cincinnati. And
Mhm.
he wrote this paper where the second half of the paper developed this what the questioner's thinking as a kind of response to divine hiddenness. And this was the thought. God hides himself because then you achieve this great good that you couldn't get if everyone was just a believer. If everyone believed there was an afterlife, then now you're missing out on this really valuable thing, namely people who don't think they'll get rewarded in an afterlife, and yet they perform the virtuous act anyway. That's something really valuable, and God can get that by hiding. That's one of Cullison's responses to divine hiddenness. Uh, so I think that this question can actually reveal a strength for the theist and say, well, this actually gives God a good reason to hide.
Okay. I I've never thought of that before, to be honest. Um, I have two thoughts in response. One is directly about this, and then the other is just more about the practicality that you initially framed this in terms of, and why does this matter? Um, so, my initial response is, if that's a good reason, then I would have predicted a lot more hiding than there is. Um, I would have predicted far fewer believers, perhaps, than there are. Than is currently the case, where uh, Christianity is the largest world religion, Islam is the second largest world religion. The majority of people in the world believe in an afterlife. Afterlife beliefs are widespread. Um, so that would push me to that kind of reasoning would make me a little bit surprised by that statistic.
Yeah.
Um, so, nevertheless, I think it's a intriguing line of thought. Um, I think it's worth maybe putting on the table as one reason for hiddenness, but not a sufficient reason, or I mean, probably I'm sure he would say the same thing. Um,
Yeah.
so I thought what you gave is a why does this matter? You turn to a abstract philosophical argument in terms of why does this matter, which reflects your thinking and the show and so forth. Um, I would say why does this matter? Take it in a very different practical direction. Um, why does any of this matter? Well, let's start with the motivational question of why, as a theist, do I help people in the first place, or why do I do right things in the first place? Uh, Let me take this kind of questioning and this line of discussion and interrogate my own psychology and say, in my day to day life, when I'm facing moral challenges and I do the right thing, why do I do it? Is it for egoistic reasons? Is it for altruistic reasons? Is it for dutiful reasons? And uh, if it's for egoistic reasons, are they theistically loaded ones? Like, because I'll get rewarded in the afterlife. And if they are those the right kind of reasons to have in the first place? Are they virtuous? And I want to suggest no. Um, So I think any kind of discussion of motivation and afterlife takes us in a very practical direction, which is self examination and self awareness about why we do the right thing in the first place. Uh, because doing the right thing is neutral on the question of motivation. And it forces me to ask the question, what was the cause behind that action? And is it a virtuous cause, a virtuous motivating reason? And this is a question that just expands then. It applies to the atheist too. Um, if you're an atheist, why are you doing morally right actions? Whether of the on more minor scale, picking up the draw papers, holding the door, helping the person across the street, or of the more major scale, like the questioner is asking about, you know, standing up for a cause at risk to your life, running into a burning building. Why are you doing those things? And here I would say the theist and the atheist both can be on the same page in moving, trying to move past egoistic motivation and not have that be the primary motivation and look to either dutiful motivation or altruistic motivation as the virtuous kind of motivation we should strive towards to become better people. Whether we're theists or atheists, we should all work towards becoming better people, and that's an important step along the path is to getting our motivation sorted out. So that's the practical direction I would take it in.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think that's the more important one because that's something we're facing every day. So I want to I want to be motivated by the right sorts of reasons. Okay, well, thank you so much, Christian, for letting me interview you. I always enjoy it. I'm glad to get to talk to you again. And I'll
Thanks for having
mention
me on
to
the
the
show.
viewers, go and check out that interview that I did with Dr. Cullison on divine hiddenness. I think if you're interested in this discussion, you'll be interested in that one. And also check out my other interview with Dr. Christian Miller here, where we talked about some of the psychological research on character that people have. So it's really interesting. All right, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Keep exploring Christianity. Okay, I'm going to hit end recording.